All right, I think we should be live. This is very exciting. Let me know if you can hear me all right. This is my very first time doing this, so if anyone in the chat could just let me know if you guys can hear me, then that would be great. I'm assuming there's a bit of a delay, so it might take a second or so for messages to come up in chat. Oh, amazing. Perfect. Great. Amazing. So I'm just going to get started. I'm going to monitor some of the questions that I'll be getting in the live chat, but what I intend for this session, I set out with a bit of a plan. So because I'm not assuming too many people will join this very first live stream that I set up, I've prepared some questions ahead of time. I was basically just going through some of the questions that some of you have submitted on my YouTube videos, or have posted some of your questions on LinkedIn. So I basically made a selection of questions that I've noted down for myself, sort of like grouped them into 6 different categories, and I'll be going through those questions. And then if I spot anything that comes up live with a question, I will try my best as well to address those questions. But before we're going to do that, I thought I might just share a quick, sort of ground rules for how we're going to do this, because obviously I've got my role working for a pharmaceutical company as well, and there are certain things that I can and cannot directly answer those questions. So I'll be picking and selecting based on what I based on what I think I am in a good position to answer. So for the categories of questions that I will be addressing today, I've got 6 categories of groups of questions that I'll be addressing, and those include career pathways and transition into the pharmaceutical industry as like one of the big field of questions that I get a lot from you guys. So that'll be one category. I then got a next category which I've called sort of like learning resources and skill development. That is all about what are the best tools, resources, online resources, book recommendations that you could check out if you wanted to sort of upskill or learn more about the pharmaceutical industry. I then got a couple of technical questions about methods and modeling as well. I've got a section on global value dossiers and HTA strategy. So some of you were quite keen to find out more about global value dossiers. Then one section I've got on industry trends and the future of HEOR in general and the pharmaceutical industry. And then the last category is professional skills and client management. So those are sort of like the six categories that I've got. And I'll be looking out for any questions that will pop up in the stream as well. So I'm just going to start in the absence of any other immediate question. I can see you've got a couple of people in chat, which is really exciting. So yeah, career paths and transition into the pharmaceutical industry. And I'm paraphrasing here with the question. So this is not just actual questions that I've got. I've tried to culminate them all into one question, sort of to address the questions that were being put on my channel. And a lot of it is about, is an MBA necessary to break into pharma consulting, especially for those coming from non-traditional backgrounds? So I get this question a lot, people asking me with their specific background, their specific study program, what they've done, is that a good background to join the pharmaceutical industry? And I think the pharmaceutical industry is just such a broad field, which doesn't necessarily mean you always have to have an MBA to get into that field. I think you can have such a broad range of backgrounds, and they are all super valuable to have. So what I see a lot actually on my channel, like you guys have been posting, saying that you've got a background in pharmacy, or maybe you've got a background in biology, microbiology, statistics, maths. I feel there's such a broad range of backgrounds and university degrees that is valuable to have. It just depends on like what do you want to do with that background, and how do you best fit in to a pharmaceutical role. And I think a lot of it, there's also a lot of flexibility. Obviously, once you start looking for actual positions, I think the more years of experience you have in the industry, the more relevant that practical experience will become, and the less relevant your university degree experience will eventually be. It's really just all about, you want to make that first jump from, you've just finished your master's, now you want to go into the industry. How do you best do that? Yeah, and I think, again, I don't think it's necessary that you have an MBA or any specific degree, really. I think you can always make a good case for many of the related degrees that are out there. I'm just trying to look and monitor chat in the meantime as well. What is that one skill which is most required in today and the age of AI to make your career in market access? I don't think it's necessarily one skill you can say. I think it's a broad range of skills you have to have. But I think if you want me to pick one thing, I think it's all about being able to articulate complex findings and to simplify in a way where you're not losing all the relevant technical detail. I mean, obviously, market access and health economics and outcomes research is such a technical area, whereas like you can easily get lost in all the detail. But I think one great skill to have is being able to simplify complex ideas without losing the essence of it. I think it's always about trying to have something that is as simple as possible, but also as complex as necessary. Sort of like you're trying to minimize complexity, because you got to remember that a lot of the stakeholders you're speaking to, they are not necessarily super technical. When you sit in front of an appraisal for a health technology assessment, for example, then you have different stakeholders involved in there. Some may have a statistical background, so they're for them it's easy to follow. If you maybe talk about your survival analysis or your ITC and NMA methods that you've applied, but then you've got other folks as well that maybe they've got a clinical background, and for them it's more challenging to follow technical discussions. So therefore, if you can break down those complex technical ideas into something that's more simple, then I think that's really one great skill to have. I see another question. Do you have any observations on how well legal backgrounds can make a career in pharmaceutical industry? Yeah, I mean, definitely. All the big pharmaceutical companies will have legal teams. It's honestly something that I'm not particularly familiar with, how those teams get involved with what sort of work they actually do on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, for sure, pharmaceutical teams will have legal teams that yeah. So I think it's easy to make that switch as well. Probably in terms of the degree that you're doing, I'm not sure. I could imagine that there are specialities that you sort of like specialize in pharmaceutical law, for example. So that might be one thing. What else is there? Should I be a professional biostatistician? I always think that having experience in statistics is a great skill to have. I mean, we're just talking about like being able to communicate complex ideas. And regardless of your background, I think having a fundamental understanding of statistics, or call it biostatistics, is always great, because we, in this industry, we deal with so much data. Like everything we try to assess, you know, we've sort of like medicine has moved from, in the early days, it wasn't really much evidence-based, but now it is just so much. It's all based on evidence, right? And we conduct all of these massive clinical trials, all with the intention of basically trying to understand if certain drugs work or not, and we do this by using and applying statistics. So I think, yeah, certainly have a good understanding of the fundamentals of statistics. And you don't need to be fancy with it, really. I think just understand the basics well. I think if you do that, you will realize that you've got an advantage over a lot of people, because I think even people may seem like they've got some level of understanding about statistics, but once you start asking probing questions, often it turns out actually those people don't necessarily understand even the most simple statistical method. So I think that's definitely something to focus on. What does a day at work looks like for a market access professional? I mean, the day, the task, the routine, the work. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and I think it can depend, right? Like different companies will have different focuses. If you're asking for market access specifically, then companies will usually you will be assigned to work on a certain product, on a certain drug, and yeah, you sort of prepare the strategy for getting this particular drug that is still like in the early phases of the drug development cycle, or maybe you've already got the phase 2, phase 3 studies. You just got the results, and then now you're tasked with bringing this to the market. So you might be actually you might be the one who builds the cost effectiveness model. So you might be doing that. You might be reviewing HTA dossiers, so the actual like written documents that you submit to HTA authorities. So that's one of the things you might be doing. And different companies handle this differently. You either do this internally, so you sort of become like a medical writer, or you do it externally with agencies that you work together with, and then you sort of become more like a reviewer, and making sure that all of the documents, all of the deliverables are prepared to a good standard. So yeah, it can be very varied. And then there's obviously all the internal meetings as well. I think especially when you work for pharmaceutical companies, it's a lot about internal communication and sharing information between different teams, making sure everyone's aware about what's going on. Because if you're in market access, then you're ultimately the one who sort of like is responsible that the drug that has gotten regulatory approval gets to patients, right? You want to make sure that you secure that reimbursement for the company. What sort of internships would be helpful for getting into pharma consulting? Should I be aiming for standard consulting firms like the Big Four? Yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be a trade-off there to an extent. If you're looking for the Big Four sort of consultancy firms, I mean, that will certainly put like a flashy name on your resume if that's something that you're after. I've personally never worked for any of the Big Four pharmaceutical consultancies, but yeah, it makes for something that looks quite impressive on a resume, I'm sure. The downside of that then becomes, for me, I would think, is how much industry-specific experience will you get if you sign up for one of those Big Four consultancies, right? Because those are more, they all surely got their departments that are specialized on like healthcare and pharma as well. But the way I see them is that they do more like high-level, sort of like C-suite consulting. Whereas like if you go for one of the the more niche, the more focused, even like a CRO maybe. So CRO stands for Contract Research Organization. Then you're much more near to the ground, and you do like the actual work. You're designing a clinical trial, or if you're in market access, you write the dossiers, you build the cost effectiveness models. You might be helping someone to submit their regulatory materials to the FDA or to the EMA. Like, I think there's always going to be a trade-off, and again, with so many things, it depends on like what you want to do. Do you want to get the more like specific experience, or do you want to be like a generalist that sort of like covers a broader spectrum? All right. What is a good course to develop my HDA competencies? I have a PhD in health economics, but I feel not good enough. So I think first and foremost, you've got a PhD in health economics. It feels like that really you've got a really good solid foundation there. I think you can be confident that you will be doing just fine if you make the transition to industry. But if you're looking for courses, to be honest, I think, well, the obvious answer is the ISPOR short courses that usually they occur just on, I think it's usually the Sunday before the ISPOR conference starts. So ISPOR EU is once a year, usually November sort of time. So it's just been last month in Glasgow, and I made a video about that, so you can check that out if you haven't seen it already. But so the official conference starts on the Monday, and then the Sunday before, usually they offer short courses on various different topics. And I think on the Wednesday as well, they might be having more like applied courses that you can sign up for. To be honest, I've never attended one of these, so but I've heard other people speak favorably of them. And many other firms do like independent training sessions as well. But I'd always be careful and try to be very specific about what are the things that you feel like you want to learn more about, because some of the courses might be too generic for you and would honestly be a waste of time. Last thing about courses I would say is have a look at, I forgot what they're called now, but there are courses that also unfortunately have to pay for, but I think they're organized by one of the EIGs from NICE or NICE directly, but they're like, basically they cover various topics, and that might be a topic in there for you that is interesting as well. I've attended a broad like introduction for how to basically submit, excellent NICE submissions, and I found that quite valuable, even though it was just a very broad overview, and like many other things I've heard before, but it was just nice having it being presented again in a very nice one-day format. So yeah, and then there's more specific courses as well, like if you wanted to brush up on your R coding, for example. I know that Dark Peak Analytics does R courses, which people seem to be talking about quite a lot, and seem to be enjoying that. So that might be something as well. All right. As a recruiter, if you're going to hire a fresher for a market access role, what kind of skill sets and knowledge you'd like the candidate to have? So I'm not a recruiter. I'm not recruiting new people into the industry. I've done long years ago. I've been in interviews where we were hiring for new interns for a consultancy. So what I always try to understand is how motivated, how excited are the people about working in the industry, because you can, like, and some companies do, like, they set up all these tests, and they sort of try to test technical experience, and some of that maybe, you know, you get a good idea about what they're capable of. But I think with all these technical tests and interviews, like, you know, you always get like a very short sort of like snapshot of someone's experience. Someone might be really great technically, but then they get nervous during an interview, and maybe that's not really representative of their actual experience. So yeah, I don't know. I always get to like try to understand how motivated are the people to work in the field. Are they passionate about what they do? And I think, to be honest, attitude is what matters most. You've already gotten the interview, then, you know, if you sort of like you hit all the points on your CV and somebody was willing enough to invite you to an interview, then I think at that stage it's mostly just about convincing the people to actually to convince them that that you're the right fit for the role. And I think a lot of that is just based on your attitude and your willingness to work in the industry. And yeah. All right. Yeah, so it's I see lots of questions about possible career paths and what sort of masters should I do, how to break into the field. I think one way I like to think about it is, and I think I've shared this as well previously in one of my videos, is you can think about it on like sort of two axes, sort of like two pathways that you can go down on eventually. And like one of those domains would be like sort of like leadership and like people management, like that sort of pathway. And then on the other end, you got sort of like your technical expertise. And then there's always going to be like a spectrum of where anyone would fit into those into those coordinates, and you can sort of like wiggle your path in between and sort of like sway more to one side or more to the other. Whereas like if you ask me, for example, I would sort of like put myself more on like the sort of like drifting more towards the technical side now, even though like a lot of my work is more like strategy now and like overseeing like larger projects. But think about it like that, just on a spectrum of like, where do you want to be? Do you want to be like a people manager at some point, even maybe not even today, but in the long run? Do you want to manage a team? Then that requires certain skills. Or do you want to be the senior technical expert that sort of like has got like all the expertise about like how to do cost effectiveness modeling, how to do statistics, how to do clinical trial design, whatever the domain may be? I think about it in terms of those two domains, and then sort of like think about where do you see yourself. Right. I think that largely covers we spent a lot of time on the first topic, which was career pathways and transitions. Oh, maybe one last question actually to sort of like address here as well, just more generally about like what are career opportunities that exist beyond pharma consulting and HEOR. Sort of like how can those be broken down into different career avenues? And the way I like to think about it is I've liked to kind of group it into different categories, and I think there are, broadly speaking, 5 categories of like jobs and roles where you could work on if you wanted to work in healthcare. And those would be pharma is the one big block where you can, that's one of the roles where or opportunities where you can be. And then beyond pharma, you've got consulting, which is sort of adjacent to pharma as well. You know, there's a big dotted line between the pharmaceutical industry and the whole consulting industry that you know provides services for the pharmaceutical companies. So that's the second group. A third group would then be academia, I say. If you wanted to do like actual research, you can. I know a lot of my viewers already have PhDs, so they know the academia field much better than I do. I only did my master's. I've never done a PhD, even though I was very much tempted during many stages of my career to do a PhD. But yeah, academia is obviously one field. If you wanted to like just do all the science, maybe your goal is to, at some point, you want to like, you aspire to teach, you want to be a professor, then, you know, academia is a field as well. So that's group 3. Then group 4, I'd say, would be hospitals, and like the hospital sector, everything that's adjacent to that. Hospitals now are being, like, across most of the world, hospitals are being run as for-profit organizations. So therefore, they need managers. They need it's incredibly resource intensive to run hospitals. So therefore, you want to make sure that you make the best use out of the scarce resources that are available to you. So there's many jobs associated with that. I think, I'm not sure if I've shared this before, but I had an interview with a hospital company like ages ago, years and years ago, when I very much first like started my career after my master's, and that was just something. The experience that I noticed from that interview was just very much. I realized it wasn't anything that I ever wanted to do, because all of the assessment process that I went through, all of it was very much geared towards finding out how comfortable you are with like laying off people. Because I mean, a lot of what these hospital companies do, they're trimming down the resources more and more, and one of the most effective ways you can, and immediate ways you can do that, is obviously by laying off staff. So that was just such a forming experience for me that I said, okay, like I don't want to work in the hospital sector. But then obviously hospitals are a very important part of everyone's, or of our own healthcare system. So there are quite a lot of jobs in that space as well. And then the last, so that's block 4, and then the last big block I can think of are insurance companies. So basically, where's the money going to come from? All countries do it a bit differently, but usually there are there's either one big insurance company or multiple insurance companies sort of that manage the money, and sort of like where actually all the money is coming from. And yeah, I've got a couple of friends that work in insurance, or healthcare insurance specifically, and they seem to enjoy that sort of work as well. So that would be the 5th category I can think of. How can you, I'm just looking at other questions now from that I can see in chat. How can you improve strategic thinking? I've made a video on that actually. So there are lots of frameworks out there that you can sort of like apply to strategic thinking, and many different concepts, right? And it's not necessarily guaranteed to make you a better strategic thinker, but at least it gives you a framework about how to approach problems, and how to basically structure your thoughts in a way that might be more helpful. So one of those frameworks is the GHOST, is it GHOST model? I forget now, to be honest. But there's a video out on my channel on strategic thinking, so you can check that out if you're interested in that kind of thing. Right. Yeah, moving on to sort of the next category then. I've got learning resources and skill development as the next big block that I wanted to talk about. And I think we've already sort of touched on the courses and like where to go with that. Another way, obviously, to learn and improve in any subject is to read books. And I get some of your questions are like, what are the best books that I should be reading? You know, and I think there's so many great books out there. So I don't think really you can go wrong if you just search whatever topic you're interested in about, and then you just sort of like buy a book. You read through reviews, and then usually you get a decent idea about whether or not that book's going to be helpful for you. Check out Goodreads, for example. I love Goodreads as like a tool to find interesting books, non-fiction books that you can read. But yeah, I mean, I've got a bit of a selection here in terms of books that I've read that I thought were helpful and shared like a good perspective to me. And I think they sort of break down into different categories, but we can talk about them sort of one by one a bit. And I mean, starting out with like just I like say non-fiction, but more not necessarily. I would distinguish between like non-fiction books that are still written for like from like an entertainment perspective. So I think one of the good books I can recommend is this one. It's Bad Pharma, written by Ben Goldacre. So that's sort of like all about the the negatives, the downsides of working or of the pharmaceutical industry, and sort of the way you know the way the industry sometimes has bad actors and likes to like all the things that you can do with data and how to basically manipulate data. So that if you want a very negative perspective on the industry, that's certainly a good read. If you want something, well, to be honest, also slightly pulling you down, a bit frustrating maybe, then you should read the Health Gap. Super great book written by Michael Marmot, and it talks all about like the social determinants of health, health inequalities, how different groups and populations are have different health outcomes and have measurably different mortality, for example. So that's a super great book to read and super interesting to understand. And he also looks at some of the ways how we could potentially address inequalities in health and proposes some solutions, but just great data overall, lots of graphs as well. Super interesting. So I can absolutely recommend this one, The Health Gap. Putting that aside, if you wanted to sort of get a better idea about consulting, then there's two books that I've read on consulting. One of which is this one, The McKinsey Way. That's like one of the, I think, the biggest book about consulting that was ever written. It's quite old at this stage. I'm not sure when this is from. But yeah, that just gives you all the like general consulting frameworks applied by people working at McKinsey. I think it's written by somebody who used to work at McKinsey. So yeah, I'm just having a look now what sort of things you can expect. Yeah, so part one is titled The McKinsey Way of Thinking About Business Problems. Talks about building solutions, developing an approach, the 80-20 rules, then the McKinsey way of working to solve business problems, the McKinsey way of selling solutions. So that is all about like business development and how to make presentations, how to play, how to present your work. Yeah, so that's a good one. And then I think this one might be a bit older even, but in sort of like a similar category is like if you're interested in like consulting in general, but it's also applicable to pharma consulting, you can read the Trusted Advisor. Again, mostly about like frameworks for consulting, very general advice, not specific to the industry at all, but yeah, might be helpful for thinking about consulting frameworks. So it covers, part one is all about perspectives on trust. Then part two is the structure of trust building. And then part three is putting trust to work. So it's all about basically getting to a point where you've got a trusting relationships with your trusting relationship with your client, and therefore if they trust you, basically they're more likely to come back and are willing to work together with you more. So that's a good one as well. And then beyond that, you've got sort of like your textbooks, what I'd call them, that are more like, you probably don't necessarily read them top to bottom, but instead I think you would more use them as a source where you've got, you know, a certain specific question and then you might look something up. So a practical course that I like on cost effectiveness modeling is this book here, Cost Effectiveness Modeling for Health Technology Assessment, written by Edeline et al. So that's quite a nice one. Again, I've not read this from the beginning to the end, but it's got practical examples that you can sort of like replicate yourself and work a bit about trying to expand on your modeling experience. So that's a great one. And then the last one I got is also one book that it's quite old at this stage, but I've actually used this for my master's thesis. It's a book written by Michael Bernstein and colleagues called The Introduction to Meta-Analysis. And that is just like I think, as far as I'm aware, sort of like the Bible to how to do meta-analysis. And it's written in a very nice, accessible way. It still gives you like all the maths that you could possibly, want without being like too overwhelming. It gives you like specific examples. Like I find it quite cool. So I really use this as also like sort of like a practical applied guide for how to do meta-analysis. And it's from the same guy who's developed the CMA software to do meta-analysis. So that's sort of all the books. Yeah, I think they're great. But again, like you can pretty much pick whatever book you want and then sort of go from there. Okay. Just looking through any other questions now. I think, yeah, so there's questions about like other markets. What are the differences between European and North American markets, for example? I think previously there was a question as well about trying to breach into the UK market, so England, Scotland, something like that. I think when it comes to different markets, like, so firstly, if you're interested in finding out like how HDA systems differ between countries, I've made a video on that already and sort of like tried to break it down into sort of different categories, how you can distinguish between those markets. So you might want to check that out. But I think usually like what happens is that you start working in a certain market and then you build that experience like as you go, as you get exposure to that market. And depending on what role sort of you want to be in, it's good to have that market-specific experience. So the longer you work in a market, of course, the more practical experience you will get. And I think you can always like only have so many markets that you're like truly an expert on, right? Just because you just don't get the exposure to all those markets. Even if you, let's say, work in a global role where you're technically responsible for, I don't know, let's say 10, 15, 20 different markets, even like on a global scale, you're responsible for everything, then at that stage you can sort of like, you need to have a rough understanding how like all of these markets work, but you will never have that same level of experience and technical depth that you might get from having worked in such a market for several years, right? So I myself would say I'm very comfortable with how the German system works and how the UK system works. And I've done projects across many other markets as well. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm like the expert, the go-to expert for these other markets. For example, I did submissions to back when it was still called CADF, now CDA, I think. So submissions in Canada as well. And, but I wouldn't call myself an expert for those markets. So I think, again, think about like what it is that you want to do, and then try and build that experience, either really diving deep into one or maybe two markets, or then maybe diversifying and sort of like just having a rough understanding about like how all markets work, and then sort of be the orchestrator that sort of oversees it all. Two different routes, again, that you could take. Maybe moving on to the third block of questions that I've got: technical methods and modeling. Can you explain how to review an HDA submission effectively? So I think it depends on like how you're doing it. Like, if you're the one who are reviewing an HDA submission, there's multiple parts that go into it, right? There's the dossier, which is like the long write-up of all the clinical background, your cost effectiveness, how the drug works, the mechanism of action, your epidemiology. Like it all, like there's a structure already given by the HDA body that you're submitting to. I think what I would focus on when reviewing such documents is just focus on like how the story flows, right? Like you want to really think about it. Obviously, you want to be accurate with the data that you're referencing and how the papers you're citing. But I think more importantly, it all needs to make sense. It all try to focus and use simple language that people understand. I think with medical writing in general, it's always so easy to venture out into using very many complex terms, and I appreciate that the medical industry, the medical field is filled with abbreviations, acronyms, so we sometimes have to use technical language, but always try to simplify it as much as possible without losing some of that technical detail and accuracy. So yeah, again, I would just go section by section, look at it individually, and then try to, as much as possible, think how can this be simplified, and also how can this be reduced in length, because sometimes bear in mind that if you're submitting an HTA dossier, like you're hoping that somebody reads the entire thing, and most HTA submission documents, they're hundreds and hundreds of pages long. So if you can find a way to shorten what it is that you have to say, like by all means do that, right? Like nobody wants to read extra fluff of text that you think is relevant but probably isn't quite as relevant as you might make it out to be. So yeah, I think that would be certainly how I would approach it. Another question that I got a while ago, which I think I promised to make a video about, but so far I didn't, was about how can you pool multiple Kaplan-Meier curves into one in R or in any other software. So, I mean, with pooling survival curves, I've got several videos about like how to do stuff in R, and I've got a video about how to use how to reconstruct IPD data, for example, all of sort of which plays into it. But I think the best way, and I'm curious if maybe the person who submitted this question is maybe in the chat, or eventually we'll get to see this somehow, what it actually was, how they approached this problem. But if you wanted to combine multiple survival curves into one, the best way of doing it would be just to get your hands on the individual patient level data and then just recreate a new curve from that. I appreciate that would probably also be the most difficult way of doing that, because you would have to reach out to all the data owners of the individual data and basically get a hold of that data. But that is certainly something that, you know, that would be the ideal way of doing it. If you cannot do that, you can also just reconstruct IPD data. And again, I've got videos about how to do that, and then sort of like do the analysis based on the reconstructed IPD data. Or you could also just skip the survival curves directly and just use the summary statistics that you get from the individual trials. So maybe you're interested in just like pooling median survival, restricted median survival, stuff like that, and then just do like a standard meta-analysis based on those estimates, which you could also do, which would be much more simple. So yeah, that was one of the questions which I think I wanted to go back to, because just again, I've promised to make a video on it, but so far I haven't. Yeah, another question I got on multiple occasions: can you create a tutorial on how to do a network meta-analysis? I want to do that at some point. Again, that sounds to me like a more involved project. Again, you have to think about it. Like I try to very much do one video a week, and with some of these bigger projects that, you know, require me to like write a bit of code and like that's sort of a bigger project that I definitely want to get to, but it might just take me a while before I can do that. Okay, next sort of category, global value dossiers and HTA strategy. I saw multiple questions on global value dossiers and sort of like what are the main components, how can you review those dossiers, what's critical about them. And I think probably similar to how you would review HTA submissions, I think writing a good global value dossier is all about like simplicity, right? And you've got your core GVD section, which I've written out for me just so that I don't forget. But you obviously, they're usually structured with, at the beginning, you've got some sort of executive summary that gives you a concise overview and highlighting the key product value and the value messages, the clinical and economic benefits, and the general market positioning, sort of starting out with that. And then from there, you might go into a disease background and the unmet needs, so disease burden, epidemiology, current treatment landscapes, gaps in existing care, patient population characteristics. So that will be your next block. From there, you might go into product characteristics, so mechanism of action, how does the drug work, what's the mode of administration, you know, is it an injection, is it a tablet, what's the therapeutic class, what is the product positioning versus its competitors. So then those sort of would be group 3. Then you got your big section on clinical value and evidence, whereas that's where you put your efficacy, safety data from clinical trials, your comparative effectiveness versus standard of care, any subgroup analysis you might be having, your patient-centered outcomes, quality of life, patient satisfaction. And then from there, you might go into like an HEOR section on cost effectiveness analysis, budget impact models, economic modeling, your assumptions and the results you get, and any sort of value for money assessments. And yeah, then you've got market access and pricing strategy. Sometimes that might be included, sometimes it may not be, sometimes that's separate documents where you talk about like target markets, positioning, reimbursement pathways, pricing considerations, competition analysis. And yeah, another section would be payer objection handling. So anticipated payer concerns and objections, and how do you think you can mitigate those concerns and address those concerns that payers might have, considering your evidence base, and what are some of the risk mitigation strategies that you could apply. Regulatory status would be another block in GVDs generally. What are the current approval status and across markets and timelines for that? And then just appendices. So I think that's generally the structure of GVDs. I'm not sure how I could do a video on that. That would be more, that would give more context or would be more helpful. But yeah, that's certainly something what I think about GVDs. Could we ever see centralized HTA guidelines for faster approvals across countries? Yeah, so I think if you're thinking about centralized HTA, I think some of that is already on the way in Europe with the JCA policy, sort of like aiming to consolidate clinical assessment rather than have it be, I mean, I know obviously it's still sort of like a parallel pathway at the moment with, you still go through country processes to submit your clinical evidence, but then the JCA is just separate to that, but you also have to do it for certain indication and drugs. But I could see a world where in the future there might be more harmonization and companies are being forced into a process that rather than doing it country by country level, you would eventually have one overarching process where how technology submissions are being handled. And I think the balance there is like national independence and like sovereignty about like budget decisions, because that's always the part that is still like separate to all of this, right? Like every country theoretically should have the choice to make allocation decisions about how it wants to distribute its resources separately, right? That shouldn't necessarily be dictated by a broader geographical region like the EU, for example. But it might be at a certain stage we might see such policy come into place. But again, that is very much speculation at this stage. Yeah. Then maybe a section about industry trends in the future. What trends are you seeing shaping the future of HEOR and market access? So I think the obvious one, of course, is AI, right? Like, and everyone's like trying to figure out what to do with AI, how to best incorporate it into HTA workflows, into market access, like into HEOR, regardless of which field or speciality you work in the healthcare industry. I'm sure companies will apply measures to incentivize people to use more AI, right? And I think I've even heard ridiculous policies and company decisions saying like, oh, you know, you're supposed to like use like 75% of your work is supposed to be spent on with AI tools, which is, I think that's not necessarily the right way of measuring it, but it could be like how I think we still need to like ask ourselves what's our way forward with how to best incorporate AI into the work we do daily. And I think it goes beyond just using, you know, ChatGPT or Claude or whatever tool you're using to basically replace your Googling habits, right, or find answers quicker. I think in the future we'll see more solutions that are smarter with AI and like leverage AI to build like actual products, like have something quantifiable. And I think the first like easy to pick fruits there are probably like SLRs. Like that's happening already. It's like there's already solutions out there where you can use enhanced, basically just to accelerated SLR, systematic literature reviews, that you can do that much quicker now than you were able to before without AI. So that's certainly one thing I see a lot, and I think it will only become more. But again, speculation as to what exact tools will survive, because I'm conscious that there was this MIT report a while ago, which I think it was looking at how many of those AI companies that are building products right now, how many of these actually create like a positive revenue. And I think it was saying that like 95% out of all AI companies that they had in their sample were actually like they were losing money. So it's just not financially a viable business to be in right now. So yeah, I think certainly there will be like winners and losers after a few years of consolidation in the space, but certainly an interesting sort of like future trend that will shape the industry. Yeah, I mean that's an industry trend I see right now. Last category, professional skills and client management. How do you handle difficult clients or stakeholders who push back on recommendations? I think that's certainly an interesting one, and I think it might actually be one of the books which I've got, where they had like a fun discussion around that, where it was all structured around different types of clients and how to handle it. I'm trying to find it now. This might take me a second. Oh yeah, differing client types. There we go. The chapter starts with, one of the dangers of writing, speaking, and teaching on the topic of trust building is the tendency to overgeneralize about clients and assume they're all alike. It's tempting, but it's dangerous and it's wrong. So, and I think then it goes on to sort of like outline different client types. Yeah. So here it says some difficult client types and how to respond. One of the types, for example, is just the facts client, where the client says, just give me the facts, answer when asked, don't sell me, why is the price so damn high, I'm the boss here. And then it sort of like goes into ways of like responding to those clients. And here it says, don't get fooled by the content of what this client is saying. This is a plea to be understood like any other. For some, it is even masking a fear of being wrong or wronged. The trick is to speak in the client's language, not yours. Use clarifying and confirming statements, affirm their values, then try to behave that way, even once in a while checking in again. And then your answer to that client question would be, okay, I get it. You don't want to mess around with niceties. You want to get straight to the point. You don't want to waste time. You want me to have content every time we talk. That's the kind of person you are. Have I got it? So obviously there's only so much to learn from these kind of things, but it's at least like a way of like thinking about different types of clients, and might give you an idea. And I've made some notes as well, and I might in the future make a video about like different types of clients and how to respond. So yeah, what did I write down? I think firstly, always like it's a good idea to like validate the question. Sort of like trying to understand what do they actually want from you, like make them feel heard. Yeah, and then just to like really like set up a framing for understanding what are their concerns, what do they actually want to achieve. Yeah, what are some practical tips and tactics that you could apply? I said, listen first, help me understand your concerns, versus immediately going to mode where you're just defending the points you've made, and really try to listen first and help like try to understand what their concerns are. Then it also can be useful to separate facts from recommendations. So present evidence separate from strategic recommendations. Like the facts will always be the facts. If you've got data from somewhere, you just quote that and that's just the data. But then if you venture into giving strategic recommendations, make it clear that those are recommendations, and there's not always going to be perfect recommendations. And you can always provide options as well for using different scenarios where you outline the risks and outline the benefits, and then basically let the client pick, rather than you just giving one solution or one recommendation, and then if the client doesn't like that recommendation, maybe they get upset. And then also lastly, I think practical recommendations, just stay humble. Like sometimes it is actually true that you've missed something, or you didn't explain the uncertainty involved with a decision well enough. So therefore it's just be humble, accept the fact that we all get things wrong all the time. And I think maturing in consulting is a lot about like admitting that. And I think there's nothing worse you can do in consulting than trying to always think like you always have to give the right answer like immediately and on the spot. That's just not how humans works. If a client asks you a question, then you don't always have to have the answer. I get that sometimes in consulting there has to be a little bit of bullshitting, and you sort of like need to pretend that you know more than you actually do, especially when you're just starting out from university, and maybe you're fresh into the field, but yet again those people are most likely the ones as well to like do all or the majority of the work. So that's always like the phase where maybe you have to bluff yourself away a bit through. But I think again you're really building the trust if you're honest and open with your clients, and you admit the things that you don't know, but then you really lean in on the things where you did the analysis, you did the research, so you know that based on this data you can give good recommendations. So I think that's how I would approach this. And last question, maybe that, and after this I'm going to close the live stream. But last question: how do you maintain work-life balance in pharma consulting? I think work-life balance is a concept that I do really struggle with, because I think so many people try to optimize their lives for work-life balance, but yeah, I don't think that's necessarily what makes people the happiest. Because if you're trying to optimize for balance, then sort of by definition you're not optimizing for anything, because your life depends, is made up of so many different categories. You've got your work life, you've got your personal life, you've got your relationship, you've got your friends, you've got your hobbies, you've got like your you want to do sports, like you've got all these different things that you're trying to balance, and work-life balance always to me implies like you want to do a bit of everything. And I think if you do a bit of everything, usually what ends up happening is you do nothing right, and you do nothing really to like its fullest potential. And I don't want to have this be misinterpreted as like saying like, oh, all you should do is work. I definitely don't think that. Work can be one of those things where you really like focus in on, and then maybe as a trade-off of that, like other things, other parts of your life will suffer from because you've made that choice. But like it can be any other group as well. You could, for example, say that you really wanted to like focus in on relationships, family, and friends. Then you absolutely should make that a priority and just spend more time with family and friends. I think that's such a I think most people would probably benefit from leaning more into one thing rather than trying to have everything be sort of like evenly balanced. And also what should be said to that, life usually, the way I see it, goes through phases, right? You don't need to be like always extreme with like the way you do work, or always be extreme with like you just spending time on your hobbies and like what you're passionate about. No, usually it goes in waves and it goes up and down. And so yeah, that's just my 2 pennies on work-life balance. I don't think it's necessarily the way for most people to be happy, but then again, it's usually the thing that people choose to pursue happiness. All right, I think I did all the things I wanted to do in today's live stream. I really appreciate all the people that tuned in for this. This was a very fun experience for me doing this live for the first time. I'm not sure how soon again I'll do another one of these live streams, but I definitely had a great time. I hope you got something out of it. And if you've got any other questions, you can always post them under one of my videos, and I'll make sure to maybe address them in a future live stream or respond to anything else. All right. Thanks everyone for coming today, and I will see you